I will share.
Oh, okay.
Ooh, the webinar is now broadcasting to all attendees. Do you mean
Oh,
to do that,
no,
Katie?
you don't want to do that. Let me see if
I think we're supposed to freeze hard tonight, and so this is the last day for tomatoes in Nebraska.
All right, good afternoon. I want to welcome those of you that are here to our Fall Forum Fridays webinar series. I'm excited that you're joining us today. My name's Katie Leffel, and I'm the director for the Oklahoma School Foundations Network with the Oklahoma Foundation for Excellence. I'm really excited about our presentation and our presenters today. But before we get started with them, I just want to do a couple of quick housekeeping things. First of all, I will email you a follow-up of the recording of this presentation and the slides. Hopefully you got the handout that was sent along with the webinar link and had a chance to print that out in case you wanted to look at it as we go through the presentation. But if not, I'll also attach that to my follow-up email. As we proceed through our webinar today, if you have questions that you'd like to ask, you can simply use the chat bar to do that. You do not need to use the separate Q&A. Our presenters today are going to monitor the chat as we go through and then pause it a few different times throughout the presentation to answer your questions. So be sure to put those into the chat box as they occur to you so we can make sure to get those answered. I also want to do a big shout out and a big plug today for the National School Foundation Association. Both Robin and Wendy, our presenters today, are very active with NSFA. And I want to talk to you just a little bit about how you as an Oklahoma Foundation leader can get your foundation plugged in to NSFA. We offer a program through our foundation that allows you to join NSFA at a reduced rate. So if you want to go to our website, ofe.org, to our school foundation section, you can look where it says NSFA Plus memberships to find out more information and get information on the benefits of joining the National School Foundation Association, a form that you can fill out in order to do so. And then certainly feel free to reach out to me at any time with questions you might have. NSFA offers a lot of benefits to their members. They have an awesome resource library. They have a treasure trove of old webinars that you can watch and have access to on demand to help with different topics you're interested in. NSFA also partners with different vendors that might be of help to your foundation. If you're looking for directors and officers insurance, or if you're looking for a grant finding tool, they have some deals with great vendors that you will not want to miss. And then my final NSFA plug is for their upcoming national conference. We were really excited this year that the NSFA conference was supposed to come to Oklahoma City. And of course, like so many things in life, COVID has sort of put a kibosh on that in person for now. But they are going to take their national conference virtual this year, which is an amazing opportunity, especially for a lot of you that may be with smaller foundations that don't necessarily have a budget for travel. At a very reasonable price point, you can sign up to be a part of the NSFA conference virtually this year, and then have access to all the amazing presentations and great content that you would at an in-person conference. So registration for that is open and at an early bird rate right now. There's also a special rate for member foundations. So if you are thinking about becoming a Plus member through us to join NSFA, there is not a better time than right now. So I would encourage you to check that out on our website. Without further ado, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about our two presenters today. I'm really excited to have them with us. Robin Callahan has worked to strengthen communities and ensure students in K-12 public education have access to the equitable educational opportunities since 1998. First, she was the executive director of the Issaquah Schools Foundation from 2002 to 2016, and then served as the executive director of the National School Foundation Association from 2016 to 2019. Robin was a founding member and co-convener of the Washington Public Schools Foundation Network. And prior to leading NSFA, she served on the National Advisory Board of the American School Foundation Alliance. Robin is passionate about the power of networks and collaborative learning. She became part of the first Certified Education Foundation Leader cohort in 2014. She spearheaded the development of NSFA's Industry Leadership Council, NSFA's Large Urban Foundation Focus Group, and she co-chaired a task force to develop NSFA Guiding Principles and Proven Practices, which she's here to talk about today. So we're so excited to have Robin here today. And our second presenter is Miss Wendy Van De La Castro. Wendy is the president of the Foundation for Lincoln Public Schools in Lincoln, Nebraska, which serves over 42,000 students at 65 plus campuses. Wendy is the founding president of the Nebraska Association of Public School Foundations. She has served as chair of the NSFA Best Practices Task Force, where she has gathered insights of national leaders in education foundation development. Wendy has over 20 years of nonprofit fundraising experience in family-focused causes like domestic violence, substance abuse, child abuse, and education. Wendy has a passion for supporting children and families, and it's based on 3 principles: educating the community, destigmatizing the realities of those in need, and shifting the paradigm of those who have the resources to make a difference in our community. Wendy and her husband, John, have 7 children and stepchildren ranging in age from 24 to 15. So welcome, Robin and Wendy. I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having us. We love our colleagues in Oklahoma, and I've had such a joy meeting many of you at the conferences and working with some of you on these best practices. So it's pretty exciting to be able to deliver these best practices to you all, because we are just really grateful. The practices came from a variety of places, as you will kind of learn as we go through. We're just really honored that you set aside this time today. We understand firsthand, because we all sit in your shoes and know that this time is crazy. Just the fact that you took some time right now to sit with us and to learn how to improve your own foundations and how to help us as an industry so that we can better serve kids. When we talk about best practices, it truly is a rising tide floats all boats, I guess. I always get that analogy wrong, but the more that we strive for excellence as individual foundations, the more our industry thrives and grows, and people see us as a valuable charitable partner in our communities, just like it should be. So as Katie mentioned, there are lots of different resources available on the NSFA website, including how to respond in a crisis. So if any of you are kind of struggling right now with that, I really encourage you to go to that NSFA website, see some of the past webinars that are available. For housekeeping, is we are going to take a little bit of break. We're going to deliver the content to you today in 4 sections, and there will be time for questions at the end of each section. Please go ahead and load up the chat, and Robin and I will be responding to that chat and bringing up some of those answers in those break times in between each section. So with that, we'll kind of get started. So I don't know how many of you feel like this, that we are an isolated group of people. We are unique in our communities. There's usually only one of us unless we're in larger communities. And historically, there's no rules, there's no one to ask. And the reality of how we build our organizations is basically limited by the history that we've inherited. I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like every effort I make to simplify and professionalize my organization just opens up more questions. And the work can sometimes feel like it gets harder instead of easier. So the more questions you ask, the more Pandora's boxes you open, and it can be maddening at times. And so many days we can feel like we're slogging or climbing one mountain after another, only to secure an outcome that's not exactly clear or necessarily relevant. So during an Industry Leadership Council meeting, I kind of leaned over to Robin and said, wouldn't it be great if we had a code of ethics and national best practices? Be careful what you whisper to Robin Callahan, because very shortly thereafter, I got a call to ask and a request to start gathering some information and collaboratively work with our leaders across the country to come up with what our best practices might look like. And these best practices are really intended to not only guide us in our daily lives and our daily work, but also to lead as an industry so that we can build national certifications, both as individuals and as organizations, based on what we feel is what works in public education foundations. So we chaired the task force, and we invited Everyone. There we ended up with 21 seasoned education foundation leaders from across the country, and they all answered the call to share their unique experiences and learnings from their foundations, big and small. We had rural, we had urban, we had suburban, and here's what we learned, is that when you've seen one education foundation, you've basically seen one education foundation, that we all have really unique, we're unicorns basically. So we had to look a little bit more deeply about what we had in common. And what we came to understand is that universally, our students need more resources to achieve the promise of their potential. So we really dug down on the principles that united us in purpose, that we thought about our shared challenges, and then we defined excellence on setting some benchmarks along the way for continuous quality improvement. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Robin.
Sorry, we're of course running many things at one time, and so we have all kinds of screens and slides and timers and all kinds of things going to keep us on track. So bear with me for one moment. So we are really a young industry. The majority of education foundations are actually less than 30 years old. And so while the oldest education foundation is over 100 years old, the momentum really took off in the 1980s, and its growth continues to this day. In fact, education foundations are reported to be the fastest growing nonprofit sector. And when you contrast that to other nonprofit sectors, 1741 was when the first nonprofit hospital opened in London. The Red Cross began in 1881. In 1884, the YMCA started. So sometimes when people say, gosh, I can't believe we haven't had standards before now, we're a relatively young industry. So given the strength of the nonprofit sector, we said, let's look at the work that's already been done to create best practices for the nonprofit sector. And then let's really not duplicate what's already been established. Let's just build guiding principles that really relate specifically to education foundations as an industry. And so we established as foundational documents both the AFP Code of Ethical Principles and Standards, and then the independent sector's 33 Principles for Good Governance and Ethical Practice, which are both on the screen. And so if you're not already familiar with these guides and using them in your organization, you want to. I'd like to just acknowledge AFP and the independent sector for sharing their work with us and allowing this to be very fundamental to what we do. So please don't try to read this slide. It's really not here for you to look at, but it's really here to illustrate a point. So Tracy Scalberg is NSFA's chair-elect, and she is the executive director of the Grand Island Public Schools Foundation in Nebraska. She's been there for 17 years. She wanted to document the evolution of her foundation. And so from 1983 until 2013, she really documented how the work and the relationship with the district and the impact on children grew over time. And this really inspired us to think about our education foundation organizations evolving. And so as we think about ourselves on this journey of continuous improvement, I'm sure many of you look at the Oklahoma City Education Foundation and think, oh my gosh, they are amazing. But Mary would be the first one to tell you that there's things that they are continuing to work on. And so what we really wanted to set out is that there are proven practices for emerging, developing, and excelling education foundations. And so we really want you to look at this as just an opportunity for continuous improvement, to find where you are on that journey, and then just look at where can we be as we evolve to the next higher level. And so we're really going to focus on the high level guiding principles, but through NSFA, we will be offering more webinars on both proven practices and then also on the kind of fundamentals that you should be experiencing along the way. So here are our 4 fundamentals and focus areas, and I just want to point them out. At a high level, we have transparency and purpose, development and stewardship of donors. We have legal and governance, and then programs. And within each of these fundamentals, there's an area of focus. And then beneath each focus area rest the guiding principles, and beneath that, the proven practices. So if you were to look at that, this is essentially the hierarchy. We have 4 fundamentals at the top, followed by 12 focus areas, 12 guiding principles, and then there is an unlimited number of proven practices. And so it's important to note here that as our industry evolves, all of these will continue to evolve. We anticipate every 3 years at a minimum, kind of coming back and looking at these and saying what's changed and how do we need to continue to evolve with our industry. So I just want to break into the first one, which is transparency and purpose. And it's broken into the following focus areas. So the first one is stakeholder identification. And our first principle is that our primary stakeholders are our students. Now, this is a question that many organizations struggle with, and we struggled with it as a group, but we said, let's put a stake in the ground and let's acknowledge that our primary stakeholders are our students. Our teachers, our district staff, our parents, alumni, donors, the business community, they are all critical, but we consider them to be secondary stakeholders. So when you look at the proven practices under this principle 1, so for emerging and developing and excelling, we look at this and we say, if you're an emerging district, you should be meeting with your district to discuss your shared priorities and projects. But when you're an excelling foundation, you could potentially be part of the cabinet. We just saw someone send out an email the other day, or I think I saw it on our LinkedIn group for NSFA. And they said, who's involved in your district's planning, sits on the planning committee. That's how you know that you are really embedded in your district, is when you are having regular and inclusive planning meetings with your top district leadership. Our second principle is that you are really a convener, a conduit between the public resources and private investments, and then our district's students. And so you think of it kind of as a funnel. How are you collecting resources and how are you funneling those and conversations around students really to the forefront? And how do we maximize the collective impact of those? And so what this looks like in practice is that when you're just getting started, it tends to be very transactional. You might have a special event. You might have just simply receipts of charitable gifts. But as you grow, you're really helping to identify resources, areas, and needs within the school district and the community. And then you're cultivating those and you're helping to just bring them to fruition and really look at how it is that you can help the district and students achieve the promise of their potential through the resources that you're able to secure in the community. We have a unique role to play in the community, and that is really of advocate. So this brings us to our second area, which is that of advocacy. And so in this moment, it's really likely that many of you have played a really important role in advocating for your students. Perhaps it's around access to broadband or technology or food or mental health services. But this is an opportunity really for us to raise our powerful voice and to advocate for equitable access. Perhaps you're helping support a bond or levy campaign. Maybe you're working with others across the state to help identify needs that you could tackle collectively and together. But this is what it looks like to be an advocate. And to be honest, when you're just getting started, there's really not a lot of capacity and bandwidth to do a lot of advocacy. But I think as you continue to evolve, you see that it's really one of the most powerful roles that you can potentially play. And you'll have access to these slides. I'd encourage you to come back and look at the proven practices, especially under this excelling. When we think about how do we help advocate for the whole child, not just academic needs, there's so many things that are involved. So social and emotional well-being, early childhood education, food security, students who have special needs. There's just really a whole plethora of ways that we can advocate and students that we can advocate for. And then, our principle 4 is just the importance of building relationships with public and private decision makers in your community. So we think that the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon game really illustrates the extent to which we're connected. We are far more effective when we build and leverage relationships as a board and as an organization with key decision makers in our community. Our superintendent is just one person, but when you look at all the ability that we have as an organization to build an important network, we can be very effective relationship builders. And so there's a continuum here, but I would say when you look at your role, one of the things you might think about as you excel is even advocating and lobbying for education issues at the state legislature level. I'm thinking about how Oklahoma came to have your strong state network that you do. And this was a result of legislative activity. And I think that this is just one example of how you can work together across your state to be able to do more on behalf of your students. The next principle is 5. This is around measuring and holding yourself to the highest standards of financial accountability, programmatic outcomes, and strategic goal achievements. This is frankly one of the most challenging things that we face. So few of us do this well across the spectrum. We might make our financials public on our website. We might do an audit or review, but most of us lack a dashboard by which we are able to both internally and externally monitor ourselves against our strategic goals. And I would say that most education foundations really struggle to measure their program outcome due to the limited resources that we have to collect data, but also just the manpower. Like if you get a grant, it rarely includes measurement data. And so it's just really an area where we struggle. But this doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to try. So we do have, as part of our examples, some ways that you can do this, and we will dig deeper on that in another learning opportunity. But at a minimum, you want to make sure that your annual report or your financial statements are published on your website. This would be the minimum level of transparency that you would want to show. And then as you think about along your continuum, developing a strategic plan with established goals, and then being able to measure that against your progress would be important. And with that, I want to pause for questions and just say, what comes to mind as you look at this? And feel free to put it in the chat or can they unmute themselves, Katie?
They actually can't talk in the form we're in now, but at the end, if you want to, Robin, we can make everybody a panelist so that everybody can see each other for kind of a last round of questions if you guys are up for it.
Okay. So I have not seen any new questions.
Yeah, I guess one thing I'll add too is that what we hope to do is, as Robin went through the emerging, developing, and excelling examples of proven practices, our hope is that you as foundation leaders across the country help us add to these. So once we've kind of laid out the concepts and what it looks like, it's really up to all of us who have had success in these areas to share with each other what that proven practice actually looks like. And that's where we're going to help make these principles come to life.
All right. Well, I would say let's just move on then to our next session.
Okay. Great. So I'm going to talk about fundamental 2 here, and that is fund development and gift stewardship. We've broken this down into 3 focus areas like the others. So financial responsibilities, roles and responsibilities, and endowment management. And as you go through these principles, kind of what Robin mentioned, what we really tried to focus on is the things that make our industry unique. So you're going to find a lot of best practices out there for nonprofits in general, But we wanted to make sure you had something, a lens to look through that made the implementation of these principles more relevant to your daily life. So we really want you to use the AFP Code of Ethics and the Donor Bill of Rights as a guide. That is a really important document that nonprofits in general have used for many, many years, and it really guides and supports best practices in fund development overall. But there are a few things for our sector. So unlike typical nonprofits who are really focusing on delivering programs, part of our purpose and our role is to make sure that we can weather the economic ups and downs that might happen within our community or within our school district. Because the reality is that we're not going to be working ourselves out of a job. That's not our mission and purpose. Our mission and purpose is to ensure that no child gets left behind academically, socially, with mental health. And so part of our purpose is to make sure we can weather the storm. So making sure that we can always deliver on our program outcomes and maintain operations during both stable and lean times. And what this might look like is simply having a balanced budget. I know that some of my foundation friends out there don't necessarily have a budget that they share with their school district to know how much money they're going to allocate in any given year. And so sometimes districts can pull money out of their foundations and leave it vulnerable to market fluctuations, to emergencies, or to be able to not or unable to meet its obligations. So it's really important to not only budget how much you think you're going to raise, but how much you're going to give out and how much you're going to spend in a given year. That's the first step. Then relying on your board to stick to its policy and communicating those expectations based on the budget is something that the school district can kind of wrap their heads around. We'll talk a little bit later about relationships, but having that strong relationship with your school district is a really important step. And it starts with understanding how the money works. So we aren't looking like an ATM, as my friend Toba likes to say, to our school district, but we're actually being strategic about our investments. Beyond that, having a reasonable overhead in the bank at all times is really common practice. But because we have foundation in our name, some may think that our endowments are unrestricted and available to help the organization stay afloat. For example, in my organization, we do have about $13 million under management. However, that I can't use that to pay staff or to pay bills. That is all allocated to the various funds. So it's really important that you have, at the very least, 3 months of overhead in the bank. But really, an excelling foundation might look at having 6 months in the operating reserve funds, is what we call them here. The next area is fund development and gift stewardship is about planned giving. So it's really important to implement a planned giving program or a legacy program to support your long-term financial health and ability to fulfill your mission. Like I said before, I used to work in domestic violence. I used to work in drug treatment, and we always used to talk about, the best thing we can do is work ourselves out of a job. And that's how we know we've made an impact. But that's not true, because children are always going to need to be educated. So we really have to look at the long-term impact and support that we're able to offer. A planned giving program is perfectly suited for our line of work. Larger endowed gifts can be put to work for perpetual good, and they're restricted to the donor interests or unrestricted for the foundation's use. Endowments and planned gifts often lead to sustainability and better outcomes for kids overall. I'll tell you and be really honest that this is an area of practice that I need to put into more place here at the foundation. I've learned this the hard way in the last, probably in the last 12 months. We used to have a planned giving officer. So we had somebody who came to work full-time and did nothing but planned giving. But we didn't have anybody working to develop annual or major gifts. So quite honestly, the school district and our teachers started to think about the foundation as the Grim Reaper. And they'd say, yep, we must be getting old because the foundation's starting to call. So I ended up reorganizing ourselves a little bit to really focus more on annual and major gifts. And I changed that about 5 years ago, excuse me, just in the last 12 months, we have gotten between 6 and 8 endowed gifts, ranging from $200,000 to $1.7 million. And that was all the work of that planned giving officer. We haven't been focusing on planned giving as much as we should over the last 5 years. And I think I'm going to see a gap in the estate gifts that I'll see in that 5-year period that we haven't been paying attention to it. So when you think about planned giving, it's really, planned giving is reaping the benefits of the work that happened years ago. And so we need to find ways, even with our limited resources, to be able to put some energy into this, even if it's not a full-time person. Just making sure that planned giving is a part of all of your conversations. But how do you do that? I'm a big believer in making sure that you are good at what you do, and then bring in the right people to help you with the things that you don't know much about. And there are plenty of great professionals out there. You don't have to go it alone. They can help direct donors to professionals who can set up the gifts so they can run smoothly and according to the donor's wishes. You don't have to have all of the technical knowledge about a planned gift on board, but you need to make sure that you have a basic understanding of how the planned giving tools and resources work, and then have a network of people that you can turn to when you do find a donor that is interested in making an estate gift to you. The best prospects to start with are right in your backyard. And so when you're ready, what I always tell people is, if you're telling your mission well, and if you're really building those relationships, and you understand what a planned giving prospect looks like, our job is just to tell our story and to understand how to help donors make gifts, and then bring in some really qualified people that can help through the legality of making a planned gift. So in emerging, it looks like a committee of professionals. Developing, we're more talking about getting some of those planned gifts from our key constituents, like board members, district and foundation leadership. And in excelling is that it becomes just part of what we do. Every year or every quarter, we really focus on planned giving efforts, and we devote resources to just that effort specifically. The next area is about roles and responsibilities, and really becoming the district's primary partner. So the strongest education foundations, especially in higher ed, are able to grow because they have hundreds of employees. University of Nebraska Foundation has over 100 employees. And they were able to grow mainly because the university said all giving goes through the education foundation. It's not the case for many high school or public school foundations. A lot of times money comes in through the schools themselves, some comes in through the district, some comes in through the foundation, and it doesn't really provide a solid base and for the foundation to be able to grow. The other thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't serve the donors. And so when you've got donors coming in at all places within the district, nobody's knowing and taking care of those donors. I can't tell you how many times where a donor might have just given a $10,000 gift to a theater program at a specific high school, and then I call on that donor in two weeks later, and I don't know that it happened. And so really having that partnership with the district helps with the donor, so the donor feels known and seen. And it's just a good practice to teach our donors that they mean as much as they do to us. Excuse me, I've got the cough going on here.
So in an emerging foundation, it looks like all gifts come through the foundation, and the foundation should be responsible for stewarding those donor relationships. Now, there's always exceptions. Every school, like for us, federal programs really handles some of our gifts, and sometimes donors do not want to go through the foundation. They want to go direct. So a foundation should never get in the way of resources coming into its schools. But as a general practice, the foundation should be seen as the place where donors come. It's important to understand district needs and have a structure. so that if there are needs out there, that the foundation's aware of them. So you're not crossing over each other, and you've got those relationships with the donors. Therefore, if the science department needs a new astronomy piece of equipment, you know about that and are able to respond to that in a quick way with the right donors. And then an excelling foundation has an annual meeting and says, okay, these are the ongoing and emerging projects happening in my district. The foundation knows about them early and is involved in the planning process, like Robin said earlier. When you get into roles and responsibilities, I think it's so critical that we understand what we are and what we aren't. So our job is to raise money and to keep relationships strong. Now, some of you have programs that you run as well, but the reason that we exist is to bring additional resources, mainly financial resources, to our schools. And so I think we should really get good at this. We here at the foundation, we recently outsourced all of our accounting and CFO tasks. And this allows us to think every day about the donor experience and the student need. And I'm not worrying about, did that check get paid, and are our tax returns ready? Because I've got somebody who's really focusing on that. Now, it's not possible for everybody, but if we're really trying to get good at what we're good at, let's develop our core competencies around resource development and relationship management. What does this look like? It means that we are that trusted resource within our communities, and no decisions about existing donor funds should be made without consulting the foundation. So if a promise that the foundation made is made through this relationship and fund development core competency, that the school district shouldn't go around that and untie that, but rather that those decisions are made together. Like we said earlier, the foundation should own all the donor relationships and be the point of entry for all of those. And that the gift acceptance policies of the foundation are in absolute concert and lockstep with the school districts. And I'm going long here, so I got to speed up, but the last one is endowment management. So it's really important that we manage the endowments responsibly and strategically to enhance our long-term growth. This also involves bringing in professionals. If we're focusing on resource development and relationship management, then we need to make sure that we've got somebody around us that can help us with investing our resources for the growth of our student population. So again, bringing professionals on, making sure that you've got a really strong, a developing organization might have really strong financial planning professionals on its board, or at least in an ad hoc committee. And that a seasoned district representative really helps understands the long-term goals of the endowment. In our organization, Barb Bartle, I don't know if any of you knew her, but her one piece of advice to me when I took this role is she said, Wendy, make sure you have got top-notch people in finance so that you can really focus on everything else. And I take that to heart. And so we do this. We have regular meetings between our investment managers and our finance committee. And our finance committee does most of the decision-making about investing of our resources so that me and my staff can really focus on donors. I think there are some questions here. Let's see.
So Wendy,
yeah,
I would just say it's 10:40. We have 20 minutes left and we've got 2 sections to finish up. So I think there was one question about experience working with PTA organizations. And I think another one around outsourcing the CFO position.
Yep, I can address those really quickly. We did a really big carrot and a small stick approach to PTA organizations. So what we've just done is offered the foundation as a fiscal, like a fiscal sponsor for PTAs, and really just saying, you don't really want your treasurer writing big checks in their living room. Use the foundation for that. But keep doing the work that you're doing. And by building those kinds of relationships where you're not trying to take over, but you're trying to just offer the fiscal backing, and you're trying to offer the transparency that comes with any nonprofit or anytime money is exchanged. What that has led us to is these relationships we never thought was going to happen, because we've got like lots of entrenched PTOs, PTAs who really are independent and want to remain that way. One of my staff members told me yesterday, he said there were 2 organizations that I thought would never, ever want to work with the foundation because they were so independent. And we just opened funds for both of those organizations in the last 3 weeks because we have said that we have all these benefits of using us fiscally. We're not going to force you to do that, but here are the benefits of doing it. And we've really found that we feel a lot more comfortable about what's happening financially with the PTAs and PTOs. I can talk more about outsourcing the CFO position. I had it later at the end. I no longer have a director of finance. I now have, I pay a little bit more than I paid the director of finance. And I just have somebody who uploads all of the accounts payables and accounts receivables to this outsourced organization. They never get sick. They never get behind. They have a team of 30 or 40 people, and they just give me a fraction of that time, which is enough because it's right skilled. So they have a bookkeeper, then they have a controller, and then they have a CFO, and I get a full team, and I get reports that are accurate, up to date, and I don't have to think at all about it. It is, I sleep better at night because we did it. So I guess, Robin, do you want to go ahead?
I will. Yep. Let me jump in here. Okay. Are we seeing my screen, fundamental threes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So this third fundamental is around legal governance and organizational development, and it's really focusing on district relationships and funding to the school district and professional staff and resources, which we think is pretty darn critical. And so Principle 11 really defines the roles and processes that are required to preserve the relationship between the school district and the foundation. There's no more important relationship that a foundation has than that with their school district. When I served as the director for NSFA, I cannot tell you how many frustrated and challenging calls I received from executive directors whose superintendents had turned over, and they had inherited a new superintendent who didn't see the foundation in the same light that the previous superintendent had. And they all of a sudden went from being a highly effective, collaborative organization with their district to kind of being an adversary. And it was just frustrating and sad. And so this is partly where this came from. We really encourage you, everyone, to establish an MOU, an operating agreement. Wendy spoke to this earlier. The NSFA Resource Library has some fantastic examples of MOUs. So if you don't have one, I would recommend that you get one. And then if you have a good relationship with your superintendent and district staff, now is the time to get that in place and to really codify it, like write it down, write what they do that supports you. Do they put out a newsletter once a year on your behalf? Do they include an article about the foundation in the newsletter that goes out to the community? You know, how can you really leverage that relationship and make sure that you keep it as strategic as possible? The second or the 12th principle is around collaborative planning practices. So how do you work with your local school board to establish and achieve shared goals? Really important that you're working with that, not just the school district, but also with the school board. So one example is that you might have a school board representative serving as a ex officio, so voice, no vote, school board or foundation board member. Then you might also consider meeting for a work study session with your school board and the foundation board and discuss your respective achievements and your goals, and even map out how it is that your goals are tied to others. If you go to the NSFA website in the resource library, you'll find a couple of strategic plans where the foundation strategic plans are actually tied to the school district strategic plans, and kind of the monitoring that school boards are using to monitor results actually take into account the work of the foundation. So you'll want to look at that as an example of how you really closely align your work. The 13th principle is around mutual benefit. So Wendy spoke earlier about being a partner in all major funding decisions. I think some of you may have experienced before when the district receives a large gift and doesn't work with the foundation to receive it, which is frustrating because you're the ones who know how to steward relationships. For them, it's very transactional. Great that that person may give, but they may never give again because they weren't stewarded. And so what our encouragement is to really work with the district to say, this is our area of expertise. Yours is education, ours is donor relationships and stewardship. And so let us work together on this. And it's also challenging because you have limited resources. So you have to say, where is it that I can get the greatest return on investment for the dollars that we raise? Most of us raise a tiny percentage of our district's budget. So if you think about the discretionary funds, it's usually a very small contribution, which is why it really needs to be strategic and put to use for kind of the highest and best purpose. And that often comes from a relationship and a conversation with the district to be able to understand what it is that they need and how it is that you can leverage your funds for what it is that they're seeing in terms of long-term, perhaps even systemic funding opportunities. The 14th principle is around accountability. We've already talked about kind of financial accountability and donor accountability, but this really comes down to how is it that the district is reporting and how is it that you're reporting so that you can meet your public and private funding requirements. And so if, for example, you are receiving a grant from another foundation and it's for some programmatic investment, it's really important that you have baked into that a relationship with the district, which says, here's the data that we need in order to be able to report outcomes to our donors. And I think one of the things that will change is that I don't know how many of you are familiar with trust-based philanthropy, but when I think about some of the teacher grant accountability or grant reporting forms that I have required in my tenure as a foundation leader, I cringe with shame. And so I think that there is this idea of trust-based philanthropy. And if you aren't familiar with it, we'll put something in the chat about it, but it's something to look at. I think there's a real trend in philanthropy to really trust that the people who are spending the money are doing the work. And so you might want to think about, what you're asking others to report on and think about how you might trust that they're doing the work and in other ways you might report it to your donors other than really tight measurable outcomes. This last one is critical. I'm talking to, I know, some staff members and also potentially some unpaid staff members who are working incredibly hard as volunteer executive directors for your foundation. And so I just want to acknowledge the hard work that you're doing and thank you for that hard work. And also say that one of the ways to really help your organization grow is to hire professional staff. It doesn't have to be an executive director, could be an administrative person, could be a fundraising associate, but it's really difficult for an organization to grow and achieve its potential unless you're able to hire professional staff. So hire them, invest in them. There's a really fantastic Dan Pallotta TED Talk. The way we think about charitable overhead is dead wrong. We'll make sure Katie sends that out as part of the follow-up. But it's really critical that if you are an all-volunteer organization that's really struggling with professionalizing your organization and being able to spend some money to invest in yourselves to grow, that you do that you really think about, nonprofit benchmarking data and how do you pay salaries that allow you to attract and retain top talent. And then how do you just use good business practices, have a CRM so you can be transparent and steward your donors well. There's just so much involved. And so I want to encourage you to spend the resources required in order to professionally elevate your organization. And it's hard. We can't do this justice in the time that's left. I just thought, oh, we have 10 minutes. And so I'm going to move on, but I just really want to encourage you to look at professional tools, whether they're a professional website or email, having your education foundation leader go through certified education foundation leader training. Many of us involved with the National School Foundation Association have found tremendous value in the CEFL program. And so it's an investment that organizations make in their leadership to really help them achieve kind of the highest level of professional development. So I think I'm going to look there at questions. I think at this point, Wendy, we probably should roll on to the last one. Yep.
I agree. Okay, so next we're going to be talking about programs. So I'm going to kind of move through this. I guess I'll just tell you the core of this is just to make sure that your programs align with what students need and that you are not kind of chasing dollars, but instead you are making sure that whatever that you do is focusing on students and student outcomes. And you can do this by using evidence-based models. So making sure that what you are funding works. Armchair quarterbacks for education should not drive educational programming. Trained educators, research, and evidence-based models is what deserves our investments. I will also tell you that there's two things we need to look at is making sure that we're doing what our student population needs and that we're not duplicating resources that are already in the community. And I think, I know that I came really close to this line during COVID. And we already had some student emergency fund processes put in place because sometimes we do student emergencies like rent, utilities, those kinds of things. But our community was also doing these things. And we have a lot of human service organizations that do stuff like this. So, but we had this in place and we knew that it was going to take a little while for the long-term support to get put in place. So we geared up fast. We raised $300,000 and gave it away. But ours was more like a triage kind of situation. But I have gotten pushback in my community because we crept over our limits. And it really taught me to think more about not just chasing the crisis du jour, but making sure that we have an education focus in everything that we do. So we stopped doing emergency funds because others in the community are doing it. And instead, we're really focusing on what do kids need to learn? And where can we make sure that we're making the greatest impact? So we during this whole exercise, we talked often about the foundation as a convener in the community. No one sees your school district from your seat. And everybody out there who's trying to do good things for schools, or do good things for kids, doesn't see it through the educational perspective always. And so it's really important that that voice is out there, and that if we're going to be talking about education, the school foundation should be involved in leading and bringing people together to talk about what our students need. It's really important that you think not just about maybe what is going on in that science program, but thinking about the protective factors that we know are research-based, things like child well-being, mental health, emergency need, family engagement. All of these things should be considerations when you're doing your program allocations as you grow. And then finally, an excelling foundation is really thinking about a child from the time they're born until they are on their way to a pathway to a living wage job. Second is really thinking about our staff and our teachers, because we're not just school foundations for learning. We are here for teaching and learning. And we know that when we support educators, we support kids. So what this might look like is the foundation supports the grassroots needs of students identified by teachers, or classroom grants. Like, you're really looking and understanding what is it that teachers need to do their jobs well, and what are teachers noticing that students need, because that's that frontline support that we can offer. As you are developing, you're looking at district needs for professional development and leveraging the partnerships that you have as you're out there working with donors in the community to enhance the learning environment for our teachers. We do this a lot by bringing in our business partners to our career and technical education instructors. So we're providing externships and opportunities for our teachers to have conversations and relationships with our donors who are in the industries that they're teaching. And then really an excelling foundation is looking ahead at teaching and learning and making sure that there are really great career opportunities and changing options for kids and for learning, so that we're staying ahead and we're investing in some of those things that might be cutting edge. So we're encouraging leadership within our schools. And then when you're looking at investments, or you're looking at how you decide what you're going to invest your organization's resources in, be that organization that is willing to take a measured risk. Pilot ideas so that your district can gather data and decide if it's going to work in your community, because it's much riskier to use taxpayer dollars to pay for a pilot that fails. But if the foundation can help with a pilot, whether it fails or it succeeds, everybody wins, because everybody learns something and you can move on. And there's not as much heat on the school district. So it's really important to be thinking ahead and being willing to try new things. What this might look like is just making sure you're aware of what's going on in education and being a part of NSFA. And talking with your colleagues across the country is a really critical first step on that. Making sure that you're looking at new ideas and being willing to walk away from underperforming projects. And that one is really hard sometimes. There's a lot of beloved programs. Maybe it's gathering books for young readers, when in reality, what we really need to do is get kids out into experiential and project-based learning, and trying to figure out how are you measuring things and where are your priorities, being willing to walk away from those things that maybe have done their time. And then if you can, as an emerging, if every year your foundation says, you know what, we're going to set aside $20,000 to pilot a new project. And then you're really inspiring innovation. Maybe it's just putting $1,000 away so that a teacher can go to a new training or something like that. That's another way to invest in community and be responsive to community issues. I don't know, Robin, if we talked about this early on, but you can be, no matter how big you are, you can experience excelling practices, even if you are all volunteers.
Yep.
It's a matter of thinking about what can you do? And this isn't like a report card for you. This is a way to encourage you to think differently about how your organization grows. So I really encourage you to look at all of these practices and say, okay, what works for me, what doesn't? And, like for me, we are excelling in some of these and we are barely emerging in some of these others. And so it just gives me those benchmarks to know how to grow. We don't want any of these to feel punitive or like I can't achieve that. Instead, we want you to go, how can we take that idea and wrap it around what we're already doing? This one sometimes speaks.
Hey,
Thank
Wendy,
you.
We're at
1
11.
o'clock. Okay.
Or 1, yeah.
So making sure that you're protecting students against political or social pressure. And we all know that this is a political environment. And so it is public schools and tax dollars are politicized. It's important to make sure that your investments are not, and that at all costs you are protecting kids from these undue influences. We talked about data-informed approaches and data researches. You'll have these slides so you can look at some of these examples. But it's really using data to make informed decisions and not just gut checks. Like I said, armchair philanthropists or armchair quarterback philanthropists can sometimes say, well, when I was a kid, this is how, and we can't really invest in that. What we can invest in is data-focused items. So, being our time, I will let Robin kind of take it from here. You're muted, Robin.
Robin, as you're coming back, I can go ahead and promote our attendees to be panelists if you all want, so that we can see each other's faces for a final round of questions. Wendy, do you think that sounds like a good idea? Okay, cool. So I'm going to start doing that. You should see yourself be promoted and hopefully pop up on the screen in just a second so that we can see you. You do not have to share your video. We didn't give you warning. But just that way you guys can all talk and ask your questions in person if you want to. And then Wendy, if you'll stop sharing your screen, I think that'll allow us all to pop up on gallery view so that we can see each other.
I think, Robin, are you sharing? No?
Nope, I've got everybody up. I can see.
I don't think I'm sharing, so.
You're good.
Okay, good.
And I see some of my friends popping in. I know that there's some of you that may not want to share your video, and that's okay too. Robin and Wendy, thank you so much for this. Hi, Deanna. I know that this is going to get, I see a group on here that I know is going to want to even probably do a follow-up on this, right? Some of my executive directors that we meet regularly, I can see all the light bulbs going off in the chat and the things that they're popping up. So I know this has been fantastic. So I don't want to monopolize, but Elizabeth, Deanna, do you all have any questions that you want to throw out while we have just a couple more minutes? Oh, you guys are both muted.
I mean, I have lots of questions, but more than that, I found this so valuable, and Katie's been working with our board on strategic planning, and I think we should use this as part of our strategic planning. I think it was fantastic.
Well, I just want to acknowledge the incredible amount of, like, Wendy and I are just the kind of spokespeople for this, but Mary was involved in this, Education Foundation leaders from across the country. And we did a lot of agonizing because we were trying to represent organizations that were big and small and had staff and didn't have staff, and had different values and different stakeholders. And it really was a lot. It took us 1.5 years, almost 2 years, Wendy, to put this together and get the finished product. And I'm looking at it today and I'm saying, oh my gosh, we need to change that. So I think that, thank you. And I'm glad it's helpful. That was the hope, was that we would give you a place to just really see yourselves and then say what's possible. And so I'm glad you find it useful. And that was our hope for it.
I think one of the interesting takeaways that I had through this process is I thought it wouldn't be so hard. I really thought that we did have, especially those of us that kind of came together around the Leadership Council area. I mean, these were people who ran foundations that were seen as pretty successful, but the difference in approach is amazing. You know, even down to when we talk about program needs and talking about the whole child, you know, some foundations really just work on scholarships, and they didn't want to feel like they were not a high-performing foundation because they didn't do anything around child well-being. So that was a fascinating conversation. And Robin and I talked a lot about, should these practices represent current best practice, or should we be leading the industry into a preferred future? And so you kind of see this sprinkling of those two things. And my personal wish is that we paint it into a preferred future, because we all have to start someplace, whether it's classroom grants or we're just doing professional development for teachers or scholarships. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to serve kids, if kids need so much more, sometimes I talk about us having 42,000 missions, because every child has their own journey. And so we have to look at that child well-being piece, even though we're not accustomed to waking up every day saying, okay, I need to put my human services hat on here and decide, you know, what do kids need? So I thought that was fascinating. Same with district relationships. Some are embedded, some are independent. And so for some people, like, it was a no-brainer to think about, yes, I have to be in lockstep. Some are independent foundations that really represent the community as a whole. And so they're like, no, I'm not in lockstep with my district because I am here to be a critical friend. I am not here to do the bidding of my school district. So it's no easy task. And and that's why we really want this to be a guiding conversation more than edict or doctrine.
Yeah. And I love these conversations about capacity. I think that's something that I hear every time I speak with foundation leaders, whether they're all volunteer or whether they're staff. I had the opportunity to work with a smaller foundation in northeastern Oklahoma, Miami, last year on a strategic planning, and it was fascinating to hear their conversations. And they were ready to hire staff for the first time, and mainly because they had a really inspiring volunteer foundation leader who looked at things through a very critical eye. And she was an attorney, so she bills by the hour. And she said, the amount of time that I am spending as a foundation president trying to do all of these tasks, she's like, I could write a check for $20,000 to pay someone part-time and then just do my actual real job. And we would be further along at the end of a year than we are in this situation.
Exactly.
And so I just thought, such a great way to look at it. It's thinking about that capacity, and is that investment worth it if it expands your ability to serve and to do what you need to do. And then the other thing that I find fascinating in all this is just talking about things like endowments. We have a big conversation going with all of our different Oklahoma foundations. Every time I talk to someone, we have everything from people who only take interest off of an endowment to fund all their activities, to people who don't have an endowment and just, are all program year to year driven. We have everything across the spectrum. And then we also have people who are old school endowment from 1980, and they are working with having their investments in CDs and making the change. I know 2 foundations just this year that I've talked with about making the change over to actual investment funds. And that same foundation that just hired staff just moved all of their funds from out of these CDs and into investment funding. And she told me they increased their income, even with all the stock market nonsense this year, by like over $20,000 because of that switch from CDs to investment funds. So
it's heartbreaking to think about the opportunity cost involved when you look at the market growth over the last 10 or 20 years. Yowza. Yeah. I need to get off, but I just want to speak for just a moment to one of the things we were worried about when we finished this is that people would look at it and they would say, oh my gosh, there's so much I need to do. And we would walk away feeling overwhelmed. And so what I really want to encourage you to do is feel really good about where you are. And just feel like how much work you've done just to get to where you are, and like stop and celebrate that and say, and then say, what's the 1 or 2 areas that I want to work on next year? And so it's very incremental that you should grow. You shouldn't look at this and say, oh, I've got all these things I need to do. Just say, what are the 1 or 2 things that we're going to focus on in the next year that will really create the most momentum, growth, return on investment of time, staff and or volunteer capacity, and just do a couple of things. And then if you just do that every year, eventually you've made a lot of progress. But please don't look at this as like an entire thing to an entire elephant to eat.
Yeah. Robin and Wendy, thank you so much for doing this presentation for us today. I know not just the people that were on the call today, but those that'll get a chance to see the recording later are going to really appreciate this conversation. So I just want to wind us up with just, again, a big heartfelt thank you to you all, and look forward to maybe doing a follow-up sometime down the road when you guys start expanding on these ideas.
Sounds good. And just for the record, in my new job, I have become an expert on donor advised funds, endowments, and how to use and partner with community foundations for things like complex assets. And so I just want to invite any of you to reach out. Katie has my contact information. This is like my new life. I wish I had known 20 years ago what I know today. And so feel free to reach out if I can ever be of assistance to you on any of those topics.
Yeah, ladies, if you're up for it, I'll include your email contact in my follow-up email so that people know how to get in touch with you with further questions.
And we only get better by talking to each other. So whenever somebody reaches out to me for a question, I usually learn more than they do.
So, thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Thanks again. Bye-bye.